This is the Ronin Philosopher, where I talk about martial arts, both in pop culture and in techniques, history, and styles, and try to look at them through a philosophical point of view. I wanted to talk about Bruce Lee and his style of Jeet Kun Do, what I thought it was, what I think it is, and how I eventually left it behind. I got into martial arts when I was living in Northeast, but at the time it never stuck, and it wasn't until college that I picked it back up again and where it became a passion. Of course, no passionate martial artist cannot have heard of Bruce Lee. As a child, I had seen replays of his films over and over again with my dad, such as Enter the Dragon, and I remember being swept up in the intensity of the fights. Among many in the martial arts community, his name is a legend, and it's well deserved. It's no exaggeration to say that he is one of the few points that traditional and mixed martial artists tend to agree on. But as I studied him in college, I found that there was a lot more to him than just screaming and kicking, and that there was in fact some baggage around who he was and the art that he created. I'm the type of person who likes to explore different ideas and points of views, and this easily bleeds into my martial arts as well. You see, I was never content with just learning one particular style and getting good at it. I remember quite clearly watching fights between other fighters who would battle each other to see whose style was better, and oftentimes this completely turned me off as it seemed more like a dick measuring contest rather than whose style was actually better. And even then, it didn't really matter much because oftentimes their styles didn't really come into play half the time. That being said, one of the styles that I was intent on learning was Jeet Kun Do. I mean, if you're going to learn how to fight, might as well learn from the best, right? In those early years, I was completely caught up in technique, the attack, defense postures, the feet movements, and so on. It is what Bruce is known for after all, being a phenomenal fighter, and I saw people take this step further, often believing that this man is the perfect martial artist and could do no wrong. His style was perfect, his form was perfect, his body was perfect. You might as well call him the god of martial arts and be done with it. Yet, as I learned more about him, and studied other styles as well, I found that those things, impressive as they were merely surface features of not only Jeet Kun Do, but about Bruce Lee himself. What I found was that JKD and Bruce Lee was often motivated by philosophy rather than just fighting. Everything about him and his accomplishments was motivated by this, and his philosophy was an adaptation in all things. He believed strongly in presenting a reason for the fighting as well as the fight itself. And in the few movies that he did, this personal philosophy is written all over the battle sequences. Initially, my understanding of JKD was that it wasn't really a fighting style as much as it was a philosophy, a mindset, a point of view on martial arts. Bruce Lee thought very deeply about how people fought and how that physicality expressed itself. And by the time of its development, Bruce Lee had given up any loyalty to specific forms. And it was this way of thinking about learning different techniques and methods that his style eventually became known for. Adapt what you can and get rid of anything that is not useful to you. And while certain concepts were laid down in the early years of JKD, there was still no formalized kata or system, just an idea that was presented, a tool given to be used as the user saw fit. A boxer was just as capable of using JKD as much as a wrestler because it was about adapting to different fighters and different situations. However, I oftentimes see many martial artists identify certain moves and techniques as specifically JKD, such as the side kick or the finger jab. Many other techniques had the same idea beforehand, nor was the concept of blending different styles together anything new. Another thing that I had noticed as well was the sainthood that was usually bestowed upon Bruce Lee by many martial artists. Like I said before, everyone thought that everything Bruce Lee did was an act of God, and pretty soon it seemed like to me he was their Jesus Christ. Yet, mention stories of his notorious temper, or that he is believed by some to have cheated on his wife early on in their marriage, or his ego, or that he hated being hit in the face, and those supporters get very, very defensive. One of the things I had to learn in order to break free of my own mental restraints about Bruce Lee was that while he may have been a physical phenomenon, he was also, too, just a man. He made mistakes along the way, and he would have to in order to develop his techniques and improve upon them and himself as well. What happened with Bruce Lee happens with all groundbreaking philosophers, and make no mistake, Lee was a philosopher. They encouraged their students to learn for themselves by giving them ideas and not strictly adhere to everything the leader says. However, eventually the philosopher's ways do become gospel unto themselves. Specifically, that there were two schools of JKD apparently that had developed since Bruce Lee's death. The first school of thought believes that everything that is true Jeet Kun Do is what Bruce Lee wrote down in his books in the early 60s. This includes the aforementioned finger jabs, the straight leads, the side kicks, the low kicks, and so on. This also included the physical conditioning, so that the body was always at peak performance and ready to fight if the situation came up. In the research that I did on this school of thought is often referred to as hardcore JKD, and people who practice this form are very strict and I would say almost quasi-religious about loyalty to this idea. Other interpretations of JKD that his students had developed after Bruce Lee had died are oftentimes disregarded or not agreed upon because it did not come from Bruce Lee himself, even though these men were taught directly from Bruce Lee. However, there is also another school of thought within JKD, and this school of thought emphasizes that Bruce Lee's teachings were about philosophy rather than technique, or at the very least had evolved to a point where it became that way, where it started to emphasize being adaptable and not having a structure rather than having a strict adherence to structure. That as Bruce Lee grew and matured in his fighting, that he became less and less concerned with style and tradition or the right way of doing things, and was more concerned about expressing himself and his feelings through his movements and his fighting. And though that expression was for him the efficiency of movement, it was still his own expression. These people believe that Bruce Lee didn't want people to mimic him. To this end, the way this school practices their Jeet Kun Do is that they are allowed to bring in other styles that are somehow related or maybe even not related to any of Lee's students and what they taught, and then just essentially throw together what you can and create what works best for you. It is for this reason that many people tend to assume that modern MMA and JKD are one and the same, because this is essentially what MMA is. Now, having said all that, I'm not saying that people who practice either school of JKD or who are admirers of Bruce Lee are all sheep. And I'm not saying that Bruce Lee did not deserve his reputation as being an excellent martial artist. While there are many urban myths that surround Bruce Lee, such as ripping someone's heart out before they know it, there are also more than enough witnesses who can attest to Bruce Lee's phenomenal skill. And there is also video evidence from the martial arts tournament in California where it was one of the few and only examples where his speed could actually be seen. Bruce Lee was a genius in the same way Muhammad Ali was a genius within boxing or Michael Jordan was in basketball. Someone who thought outside the box and could create with it with unusually intense focus and skill. That kind of gift can't be taught, only imitated, or better yet, inspiring others to succeed as well, but in their own way. And this is where the philosophy of Bruce Lee and Jeet Kun Do has started to affect my life. For me, I am much more of a philosopher than a fighter. Even though I do fight, and to a large degree I happen to like fighting, I tend to appreciate more the substance of it, where it comes from, its history, how it can be adapted and changed, and how it can interact with other people and other styles that are either related to it or not related to it at all. These aspects of human interaction fascinate me. I had gotten to a point where I stopped caring about who said what and who did what, and would rather try to listen to what people had to say and would try to apply what I could, but that whatever they said and whatever even I learned or adapted was not gospel, and I would not strictly adhere to it if I didn't need to. I did not consider such extreme loyalty fundamental because I am not that person. I'm not Bruce Lee, I'm not Muhammad Ali, or any of these other great fighters. But I do fight, and that's the important thing. I had to express myself in my own way with the styles that I picked up from these people, and that was the most important thing to me, and still is today. Anything that felt like I was trying to copy or be or move exactly like any of these people or any other fighter would be a betrayal of who I was, because at that point, I would stop being myself and would simply be a clone or a robot of what someone else thought I should be. And within the past year, I had seen and come to realize just how intense this rivalry between the two divisions of JKD was. And for that reason, and as well as just where I felt that I was personally at that time, I decided to abandon JKD, or at least the idea was a practitioner of it. Beforehand, I would often say that I had learned many styles, but that JKD was my base form. That was the one I always fell back on when I was actually fighting. and not just sparring people. However, now I don't say that, and I just basically explain to people when I'm asked that I'm a freestyle fighter who's learned different styles and tries to apply what's useful to me at that time. Many people criticize this view of martial arts, as well as JKD, the idea that someone is just throwing together a bunch of stuff and saying that they are a master or a creator of their own form. And for sure, there's a lot of bullshitters out there who do this. Having said that though, I am by no means saying that I have become a master or a superior warrior or fighter or anything like that, because I don't believe in such things. However, I do feel that I have moved beyond the point of just defining my fighting style and myself as a person by structure, technique, lineage, and schools. Such things, at least in terms of understanding the fundamentals, are important, but at the same time, it should not define one's soul and the heart of their style and what they want to achieve in their martial art. The fundamentals can be the seed, but they shouldn't be the entire tree. Whatever a martial artist's focus is, they should do the necessary regimen and fundamentals that are going to help them succeed in that particular goal. That being said, not everyone's goal in martial arts is the same. Therefore, how they get to that point is going to look different from how someone else looks when they do it. Neither one is necessarily wrong, it's just different. There are always going to be people who are going to praise their own martial arts as superior and their lineage as the basis of the superiority of their style, and attack anyone else who says otherwise. In this sense, martial arts is very much like the wars of religion that occur across the world. And I feel that if one becomes a master in one style, they eventually stagnate as a person because they stop growing or trying to grow, since they have now learned everything that there is to know about that one particular technique and have no desire to learn anything else new or challenge themselves in that way. That is not who I am. I am someone who likes to grow as a person and in my fighting. And for that reason, while JKD was useful to me, as well as many of Bruce Lee's concepts and ideas, I had gotten to the point now where I feel like there's other stuff out there beyond that. And I want to learn those things and apply those things if I can.